Welcome back to The Hope Show. We hope you enjoyed the last 3 episodes, and we're very excited about the topic today. I'm Julie, and I have with me Angel.
Hi.
Danielle.
Hello.
And a new guest, Allison.
Hi.
So we're excited because we're going to be talking about the main premise of ABA and how it's used in intervention for autism, but specifically reinforcement and punishment. Yipes. Okay. And the really addressing the community in this one, what we talked about in our intro, and we're going to be talking about really hard topics in this podcast, and this one will be no exception. And so the community, the adult autistic community, and even providers really, speaking out and getting a little bit more uncomfortable with things that appear to be bribery, like dangling the carrot. What are you working for? But also the idea of this, the ABA has a bad reputation for being dog training, and in which you give children food as a reward for the behavior you want to see. So we're putting it all out there today. And I think that the first thing that we really need to do is talk about what reinforcement is. Danielle, can you define reinforcement for us?
I can. So, reinforcement is the practice of utilizing reinforcers to increase the likelihood that a behavior will occur again. A reinforcer is a stimulus or something that happens after the behavior and increases the likelihood. I kind of repeated myself there, but does that make sense?
It makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, with that being said, there's also positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement. The words positive and negative in this context do not mean good or bad. It just means that something is added or taken away. So with positive reinforcement, we're looking at, if let's say we're looking at the behavior of watering plants, okay? I water my plants. After I water my plants, a flower blooms. Now, okay, I know that it doesn't happen right away, but let's just pretend that it happens right away, okay? The behavior of watering my plants, the likelihood of that is going to increase in the future, okay? Now, when we're talking about negative reinforcement, we're talking about taking something away. Mm-hmm. So if we're looking at
The seatbelt.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
If we're looking at putting our seatbelt on, we're driving down the road, we don't have our seatbelt on, and we hear beep, 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 okay? If we want to increase the likelihood that I put my seatbelt on, we're going to take that annoying sound away, right? So really, all of the car companies have put in a negative reinforcement behavior plan for increasing the likelihood that we're all going to wear our seatbelts all the time, okay?
Absolutely.
So again, behavior is seatbelt goes on, sound gets taken away. So it's subtracted. So when you see, R plus or R minus, we're really looking at adding and subtracting, actually.
I'm glad you said that too, because people think of negative reinforcement and assume that it's punishment.
Right.
But in behavior analytic terms, that's just incorrect.
Right.
So you said something about reinforcer. Mm-hmm. Reinforcers. I've heard that 15 years, 21 years of my career. Really. So what, can we talk more about what a reinforcer is and how that's different?
Yeah, it's not necessarily different. It's just the actual stimulus. So it's talking about the noun, the person, place, or thing that happens after that increases the likelihood of that behavior occurring again. But a lot of people get it confused with the word reward, and that's not necessarily the same when we're talking about increasing or decreasing behaviors.
So do we overgeneralize reinforcer? Like this is a reinforcer?
Absolutely.
100%.
Okay.
Absolutely,
Yes,
we do.
in layman's terms and in
practice.
Yeah. Correct. Yeah.
Okay. So can anyone have an example of that?
So I have an example from my very first experience in ABA a really long time ago when I was in a Lovaas style DTT home program. And I was definitely early on, before I had a deeper level of understanding, I was taught and trained that I place a series of demands, and the reinforcer was me saying, go play. And then the child was supposed to go to a shelf or an area of the room with toys, puzzles, and things like that.
And we called those reinforcers.
Well, I was told the reinforcer was go play.
Oh, okay.
And I remember my first problem was that he didn't want to go play. He actually wanted to stay with me. And when he went to play, I was supposed to write my trial by trial data on how he responded. And so I think the reinforcer of go play was assumed. He didn't want to go play. So was it a reinforcer? He actually wanted to stay with me and continue engaging with me. So I think there were a lot of assumptions about reinforcers. Maybe all the items, like you said, were assumed reinforcers. He didn't know how to play with any of them appropriately and independently.
So go play, yes, could be really punishment. Anyway,
definitely could have been.
Yeah.
I can't label it 100%. I remember asking how to change it.
Okay.
But then I never did change it because I just found ways to document, when he could stay with me and I could keep engaging him because it didn't feel right to make him leave the table. So I didn't.
And I think that a lot of practitioners utilize preference assessments to kind of determine, so what reinforcer should I be using? And preference assessment, in my experience, seems to be we are utilizing those and assuming that they're reinforcers, which is what a lot of people are taught. But we're just assuming, like, how do we know that it's a true reinforcer? And then, like you said, Julie, we're overgeneralizing. We're utilizing that term. I'm giving him his reinforcer. I'm giving him his iPad right now. Okay, well, am I giving him a reinforcer? I don't really know. I'm giving him something that he's asked for, potentially. Something that when I gave him 3 options, that's one he picked. And it seems like it would function as a reinforcer because he did choose it, right?
Yeah. So let's then, I guess, talk. So reinforcers are, things. It could be people, as we talked about. So let's address the thing about the bribery. Okay. Address the concern with bribery. I guess in light of our conversation about reinforcers. So when you have this, if then. If you do this thing, then you get this thing that I've decided is a reinforcer, right? Is that correct?
Well,
I'm sorry. I just want to clear up really quickly that it may still be said that it's a reinforcer because the data says that the behavior increased. But that doesn't mean that actually that's the item that increased.
Yeah.
I think people confuse a reinforcement and bribery. And I think that really what's key is that bribery is when the delivery of the thing occurs before the desired behavior occurs. As like a
promise of
like
a
a
reward.
promise of a reward.
Yeah.
And with reinforcement, the reinforcing thing occurs only after the desired behavior occurs.
Yeah, and that's
so
what
it's
I want to
really
get
how
at.
you utilize it. If you're utilizing reinforcement, you're not bribing.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that was a huge concern for me previously. And that's one of the things that I was really relieved to find at the Hope Source is that we're not using tangibles or edibles or if-then statements to increase these desired behaviors. We're utilizing other types of reinforcers. It doesn't just have to be these specific things that we can do a preference assessment on really easily. And that was like a huge change for me.
Yes, I hate the sentence. What am I working for?
Yeah.
What are you
Yes.
working for? Just not allowed in my building.
Yeah. I mean, because really, like what we found is, what you're working for is really just to stop engaging, not
In
really
those-
to play with the thing. I mean, maybe,
In
but
some practices.
Like escape, like you're.
yeah. So
working
like
to-
that's actually what's reinforcing, not the iPad.
Yeah. So I previously worked with a client and he had a token system. I was his BCBA and I put in the token system and we would assess his preference. Like, what do you want to work for? He would earn his tokens and he would get whatever it was that he established he was working for. And with this particular client, he was requesting the iPad every time. He earned his tokens. He wanted time on the iPad every single time. And for a while, I was like, okay, cool. he's choosing a reinforcer. That's great. He's earning all of his tokens. Doesn't seem like there's a problem, but something inside of me was just like, this doesn't feel right. And I couldn't figure out exactly what it was. But as I just began to think and kind of process it, I just wondered, like, was he really wanting the iPad, or was he really wanting that routine of, this is what's expected. I get my tokens, I get the iPad. Was he just wanting to get away from everybody, and that's the only way he knew how to ask to get away was, I get my iPad and then I get away, which is escape, right? So what was the true function of his behavior of requesting the iPad after his tokens? I don't really know.
And I think it's like, it's important to talk on that, you know, obviously we're looking at what behaviors are we increasing. So, I mean, I guess if it depends on what you as a practitioner are increasing, but at the Hope Source, because the goals that we're trying to increase are social, emotional, relationship, trust, all of that. You know, yes, I know those aren't behaviors, but the behaviors that show that,
Skills,
yes. So if we're increasing that, then we don't want our kids to be reinforced by escaping us.
Well, it actually doesn't function as a reinforcer for those types of skills.
Right.
And I remember that being really difficult for me to grasp. I know in a past episode I've talked about the struggles I had with switching and, you know, my mindset and things like that. I was task-based. It was really difficult for me. And it was an aha moment when I realized why we don't use tangible reinforcers and why tangible items, because they don't reinforce the behaviors that we're specifically targeting. And I remember as soon as I was like, oh, I forgot to really cue in on the target behavior, my bad, then everything kind of fell into place.
Yeah.
I think it's that difference between the reinforcer being related to the behavior and the
Yes.
reinforcer not having anything to do with the behavior that they engaged in.
And I might have used this example. I always use this example.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I've said it in a previous episode, but
may have
it's
stolen
really important for this one. But when you know, we think about, you know, just because electronics is commonly used, we don't use any of electronics or food or anything at the Hope Source. But that's why I love this example of, you know, when I say, hey, Danielle, let's go out for coffee and, you know, we'll get to know each other. We'll talk to each other about how, you know, our kids or how things are going. And then after that, if you want to like take a break and scroll on Instagram, that would be okay. But the conversation and the relationship that we're building and your competence in, you know, whatever it is we're talking about or sharing perspective, that should be what is reinforcing you to stay engaged with me. And so if you were to get on Instagram or Facebook and ignore me, that's taking away from the actual thing that we want. The behavior wouldn't occur. The behavior is engaging with me and emotionally engaging with me. And when you check out, and you have that friend who is just, you know, on their phone and they're like, no, I'm listening. And that kind of thing. And it feels like we're not together, and it feels like, so I love that example because it really goes back to the goal, too. And it goes back to that wouldn't make any sense if emotionally engaging with me or that social, relationship is what brings us joy. Then you separating from me, or escaping me, then that doesn't make any sense to offer that to you.
And your behavior is going to change if she does that, right? So it's going to change your behavior. You're probably not going to interact with Danielle as much if she's scrolling on her phone. Right. You're going to maybe try and maybe we're done at Starbucks.
Yes. We're never going to.
Or I'm going to get on my phone and then we're just like sitting here and we're no longer social or emotionally engaged at all.
With with consequences that don't make any sense to the target behavior.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of what you're reinforcing. Let's think about something in social communication.
Yeah.
In my past, we would do listener responding programs. Show me pointing.
I've done that
and
too.
Yes. Okay. Show me thumbs up. And I could deliver any item, edibles, iPads, toys that we were assuming were reinforcers following that, because what I was reinforcing is you responding to my demand.
Right.
Whereas our goals, it wouldn't be show me pointing. We would set up an opportunity for the client to point
Functionally.
And what naturally would reinforce that is that we look and then respond to the point as communication. If they were pointing because they wanted me to look at something they were looking at and I didn't, and I gave them an item, it actually wouldn't reinforce the function of their pointing.
Right. Exactly.
It doesn't make sense, going back to what you said,
Yeah.
with our goals.
Yes.
So they're never
Perfect
going to
example.
learn to use a point in context. They're going to never going to learn how to make that meaningful.
But the
for
assumption
them.
was that it would generalize.
Right.
Yes.
But then you have to put in a generalization program.
And understand
don't have
how
to
you
do
want
that.
it to generalize. And
Yeah.
I wasn't, personally, I wasn't taught how to generalize show me pointing, show me thumbs up to
Right.
functional and interpersonal communication.
Right.
Same.
I wasn't trained to do that
Yeah.
or taught to do that.
Well, if we think about that in every day. So going back to last episode on social significance, okay, when you think about even like the workplace, where you might have something like, just put it in that cabinet over there. So understanding how often, we're doing that and we seek to clarify and the social significance, of learning the point and learning that for communication and clarification. And so if we're reinforcing the wrong thing, or if I think about the good job, an example of that when in the past where it was, if I'm just teaching you pointing, point to the plant,
Good job.
and then good job that I followed your demand.
That's right.
Yes.
Good job, that's correct. Like, what is it?
Yeah.
And so I think understanding, that's why I hate good jobs. And we try to be a bit more behavior specific, but really understanding what has to happen after. So if I point and you're like, which plant? And then I have to do more as your social partner to say, well, that one over there. And then I have to look to you to see, are you attending to the same thing? And so making sure that I'm not just good job what, there has to be that you're looking and we now come to understanding that's what's reinforcing.
Yes.
Yeah.
That increases your discovery that if I point, the person looks and then something happens, well, I'm going to keep, that worked. Oh, this works.
Right.
So that's going to increase the likelihood or future frequency of me pointing again.
Yes.
I don't need, but if you gave me a Skittle, how is that going to increase that?
Yeah. So I've actually worked on this goal specifically with clients where we are increasing their use of nonverbal communication, right? So I had a really cool experience, a client who had this goal in treatment.
In the past or current?
At the Hope
Okay,
Source.
okay.
So Hope Source goal,
At the same time.
increase the use of nonverbal communication, right? And so in this specific scenario, we were on an outing at a store and we asked the client to go just like a little bit farther away and grab a box for us. But there were a plethora of boxes that he could have chosen from, right? So instead of him coming back and checking in or anything like that, he just like was like pointing to like, he lifted up this one and kind of like gave us a look, and then we gave him the thumbs up. So he knew. So he was using his communication on his face and pointing, all nonverbal communication. We were able to provide that reinforcer, assumed reinforcer, I guess.
Yes.
That feedback of him, like, yes, that's the box that I want. It was so meaningful, and then he brought the box
But the
back.
beauty in that is that we never had to train. We never had to go to the store. That was the first time that happened naturally in that location. It was never to where that was a program where you pick something up and check.
Never in programming, never in treatment. Show me pointing or thumbs up or make this face. Show me confused.
Yeah.
Nothing like that had ever been in
And
his treatment.
and just a series of experiences which we've talked about, with our approach, and how do you have this intrinsic motivation, which will be its own episode, but intrinsic motivation, to to want to do that as these experience happen. And it's because this worked for me. I was competent, I was successful. And the point worked.
Yeah.
Right. And somewhere along the line, there were lots of, pointing to help him to realize he could use that successfully, and it worked. Someone responded by communicating back. And so that's super cool.
Yeah.
Love that.
Yeah. And I think I feel like there could be questions like, okay, well, if you're not doing it this way, how are you doing it? Because it didn't happen, naturally in development, possibly. Well, what we're doing is we're breaking all of those skills down discreetly. We're still breaking things down discreetly. We are still isolating each one. So instead of using prosody and gestures, we might just be working on gestures first, but we're not doing it in a help me out here, like a rapid. We are doing discrete trial teaching, but we're not doing discrete trial training.
Or mass trials.
Rapid. None of that's happening. We're allowing processing time, which we'll get into a lot later. But so that we are teaching those skills, but it's not trained, I guess. It's not memorized.
We're still using the 3-term contingency.
Correct.
And being very specific and intentional with what we're reinforcing. We're isolating the target behaviors, but our reinforcer is based on it natural and is based on the meaning of your behavior.
Yes.
It has to be related. It can't be unrelated.
Right.
So let's go back to the thing. Okay, we work. I hear this a lot when people say, "Oh, you don't use tangible reinforcement," in the sense of we don't give iPads, we don't give, and then I always hear back from behavior analysts or other people in the field, but you go to work for money. Yep. Okay, or token systems too, because that's very common in schools. It's very common in ABA programs and things like that. And we don't use token systems either. And people are usually floored by that. And then the rebuttal is always, but you go to work for money.
Yeah, I mean, well, we do. We walk in the door for money, right? And we're gonna do that if we are just doing our job for the money, which I'm going to tell you this right now, we are not in this field for the money. Okay. So if we we're going to become stagnant. We're just going to be doing the bare minimum. There's not going to be any intrinsic motivation. And eventually we're just going to keep wanting more, but for no reason. We not that I'm doing more work and I need more money. It's just that I'm here, I'm doing my work. In order for me to continue, I need more money.
And no more amount of money solves burnout.
Right. Exactly.
And things like that.
Exactly.
So it can't. And just like we see, or we have seen in the past, really in our past programs, I don't know if you guys have had that. I have had that, where it's just you see these huge gains and then this plateau.
Yes.
All the time.
And one, not including the plateau, but also no ability to generalize, which is a separate issue. But that plateau, and we see that in our own lives, unless we're in a job that is intrinsically rewarding.
Yes.
Or the people, the social relationships that we have, we see I put in this effort and this is what I got back.
Yes.
I was able to, fix the whole Excel program for everybody or whatever. Not me, someone else. But and everybody had an easier life at work, and everybody was like, "Thanks, Allison. Like you saved the day."
Also wasn't me, but that's
also whatever. But being able to, those types of things and those relationships keep us coming.
Yeah.
And that's why usually it's hard to quit jobs when you are, one, have those social relationships, but two, you get so much out of it, whether it be from your clients, your coworkers, the work that you're doing.
Right.
Even if you got a raise, kind of thing. Go ahead. Well, I'm just going to go back to our clients. So even though it's difficult, Us helping build intrinsic motivation for our clients to engage in the social emotional behaviors is the goal as well.
Yes.
And I know we're going to have a whole episode on it, but it's just, that's what motivates all of us to continue doing things that are hard. All of us.
Right. Because our job, anybody's job, there's always going to be pros and cons to everything. So if there isn't true intrinsic motivation, then it's easy to walk away because something got hard. But if I'm truly feeling, motivated, I truly love what I
just
do.
The growth.
Yeah.
When we grow as people.
Right. Knowing that that's going to be the outcome is going to keep me going.
Yes. Right.
Yeah.
And I think about that voice. So going back to the community and their issues with how ABA has been done in the past, or and understanding that voice, so that passion, and to have, if it's intrinsically motivating, that means it's personal. But we take that all away when we abuse their interests to really manipulate them into complying. So it's like, just because they like this iPad game or they love goldfish crackers, right, doesn't mean that we, have to use that to the point, really for us, for our pretty graph. We just really have to be careful and the implications with that.
Yeah. I mean, because that could really turn into something pretty unsafe. If we are using the thing that they like the most to get them to do what we want them to do, when we really look into that, it could be pretty scary. Also slightly demeaning, so I agree. Being careful is key. And I think, we've talked about before, the idea of it is to fade that out. But
right, these tangible reinforcers, I think everybody has kind of learned somewhere in their schooling or been reminded and practice that we should be working on fading out our tangible reinforcers or transitioning them to something more natural. But I know that when I was utilizing tangible reinforcer or tangible items as assumed reinforcers, I wasn't fading them out. That was unfortunately not a concern.
And I read a lot on forums. A lot of BCBAs are asking those questions on how are we fading this? And there is a call to question, which I'm excited about, this call to question of those practices. But I see those on the forums where it's, how do we fade this? How do we do this? It's not being faded. But if you look at the actual items that are assumed reinforcers, we're talking about screens. And we talk about, how addictive screens can be, and also food. Food is a very easily addictive situation, but it's also the thing that you can control the most. Controlling what goes in, what comes out, and really, are we playing with fire when we use food? And it's just really to me a very scary thing, of the thinking about the ethical implications of those highly addictive things potentially, even if it is what appears to be motivating them, what it appears to be what they like.
And I think with food specifically, in school, to become a BCBA, you learn that food is one of the unconditioned reinforcers. So we shouldn't have to test whether or not it's a reinforcer. We know, big air quotes there, we know that food is a reinforcer, so it's easy to use right away. But we don't think about the addictive properties or potential other ethical implications that can go along with utilizing food as reinforcers.
They're just our fundamental rights as human beings.
Yes. And it's just not nice.
Yes.
Let's be
so
kind.
I understand the, the adult autistic community who's been through ABA and what they're saying and listening to them and hear them. And that's what I think, those practices done in the past and, in that way, but that doesn't have to be we don't, as clinicians in evidence-based practice, we take those desires, but we really, really have to be careful in considering, one, what we've talked about, is it actually a reinforcer? Right. But two, just because it's an interest, we have to be careful with that interest. And so that is the challenge today, when clinicians are, writing programs or, whatever they're looking for to determine preference assessments and what is reinforcing, for their client, it's going back to what are you actually reinforcing?
Yep.
What is the goal? Are you reinforcing compliance, which is really, really scary? Or are you reinforcing that social communication and that what communication means or whatever your goal is? And so I think just being really, really careful and mindful and sitting down and saying, wait a minute, is this doing what we think that it's doing? And so I think, and I know that we're going to get to the flip side. Maybe it's not the flip side of punishment in the next episode, to kind of really talk more about some of these things. So we look forward to seeing you next time.